Good afternoon. I'm joined today by Adrian Waine of Photography for Industry. Good afternoon, Adrian. How are you?
Good afternoon, Mark.
Good. I'm intrigued to know a little bit about your history and how you came to form Photography for Industry and how long ago that was. I'd love to know a little bit about the background, first of all.
Okay, let me go back for a while. It started for me as a hobby that took over in my school days. I was keen on taking photographs, and in my school days, I learned to process and print in the school darkroom. And by the time I left school, I realised that this is what I wanted to do. And we're going back to the late 70s here, actually. Anyway, when I finished my A levels, went to college. I went to Blackpool College and did 3 years professional photography. Had my first job photographing sofas and chairs for Littlewoods catalogues. That was in the days when we used to have a 2-inch thick catalogue. You remember?
Yeah, I remember those.
Most people had those at home. Everything from pots and pans to kids' playgrounds. But yeah, I started on furniture. And the good training there was the attention to detail. If you're photographing a sofa, well, the pile all needs to be in the right direction. The tassels need to hang straight. All that sort of detail that will affect people when they see a photograph and, am I going to buy this? Does it feel comfortable? Anyway, from there, I progressed to John Mills Photography in Liverpool, which was very much a general practice photographic outfit. And then one day, an opportunity came and found me. The Arabian American oil company, Aramco, wanted a photographer to go out to Saudi. So it was for me. It was the right place, right time. I put it all down to, well, it's luck, but obviously they needed somebody who was qualified who could do the job as well. So I was 24 at the time, and there was no reason not to go. So I took it, and 6 weeks later, I was off. So for the next 7.5 years while I lived in Saudi Arabia, I obviously became acquainted with the Arab culture. I found that I fitted in very well, probably because I was young. I didn't have any prejudices, and I'd not been far enough afield for anything to really influence me. But once my boss applied for my plant pass, he really made use of it. I was in these big gas oil processing plants all the time, whether it was going to a platform by helicopter in the Persian Gulf or whether it was in the middle of the desert. On one occasion, I even went to the empty quarter, the Rub al Khali. So I had a real good geography lesson at the same time. And I've ended up over the years learning an awful lot about, number one, a very big corporate business, but also a lot about oil and gas. So when I left in 1995, came back to Chester to start working for myself, I really used the industrial background as an opportunity to try and make myself notice to industrial companies who would want that style and standard of photography, but also where it might fit in with where they could market themselves.
So that was 1995 when you started the business in the UK.
95. I left in 88 and came back in 95. So I did 7.5 years in Saudi Arabia, which is a good stint by anybody's stretch, really. Yeah. So I started in 95. So what's this? My 27th, 28th
year, is it? 28th year?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've seen some changes in industry in that time.
Yeah, well, a lot of the industry here in Ellesmere Port, where I live, I mean, it's gone. But having said that, there's new industry that's come up as well. And as you well know, one of the industries that is highly topical right now is energy. And I'm in an area at the moment where hydrogen's being talked about a great deal. In fact, next week we've got the hydrogen show, which I'm going to go to. And as this develops and progresses, and these alternative energies, that's a real slice of the cake that I want to win, because I think I'm well qualified for it. I've got the right industrial background, and geographically, I'm also very well placed.
Fascinating story, absolutely brilliant. When you think of success, Adrian, who would come to your mind?
Well, probably some of the obvious ones are people like the row of people you see once a week in Dragon's Den, Alan Sugar. They're all people who've, well, they seem to have successful backgrounds. They're wealthy people. They employ people. They've run various businesses. And I must admit, I watch Dragon's Den every week, and I must admit, I like the lineup of people there. I feel that, you know, if I sat next to them at a black tie dinner, I feel like I could have a conversation with them. What they do like to work with, I don't know. Probably quite tough because they know their stuff.
Is there one in particular that inspires you?
Well, I do like Deborah Meaden. I think you know where you are with her. I think yes, she's probably a tough lady, but I think she'd also be quite how do I put this, kindly. I think that's the right way of describing her. She comes across as being a kindly type of lady. If you weren't going in the right direction, then, you know, I think she'd find the way of steering you back. I would hope so.
Yeah, and she's got some very, very good values from a sustainability point of view, from a green point of view as well.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points they keep pushing these days, isn't it? You know, when she has her introduction.
Okay. Interesting. Also, love the programs. It's fascinating to get another insight. We've all come, and I'm sure this did affect you. We've all come through the pandemic for the last 2.5 years. And what changes did you have to make to your business during that period?
Well, the biggest problem for me, I think between the October and the May, there was no work at all. The greatest problem is the fact that because of the photography I do, I go onto other people's sites, you know, whether it's a manufacturing site, a quarry, a process plant, somebody else's offices. You just could not get onto third-party sites. And it was a case of, well, if you can't come on, you can't do your job. So of course I ended up doing the Zoom meetings because that was interaction with other people. At least you could keep that going. But I couldn't actually do, you know, any physical work because I couldn't get onto a site. And I think one of the problems as well is a lot of those jobs that I was due to do that would have fallen in that period, they'll never happen now. The opportunities come and gone. And, you know, I've tried to resurrect some of them, but they're just never going to happen.
And since it's become easier for us to move around, would you say it's coming back? More people do want to have their industry photographed?
I would hope so. I mean, that's what I keep pushing for. I've certainly been to 2 networking meetings this week. I mean, they weren't industrial based. One was on the Wirral, one was in Liverpool. But nevertheless, you're meeting business people. I mean, I'm a sociable chap, so I mean, I like to get out and about, and I like to talk. Yeah, you know, a lot of people tend to be interested in my background. You know, well, how did you end up in Saudi Arabia? That's an interesting story. The years I was there, you know, there was lots of influence that rubbed off on me, which I use now. I tend to find that I talk about Saudi Arabia probably at least once a week. But certainly people are hosting meetings now, you know, getting together, doing the face-to-face stuff is starting. And I hope that continues. I mean, very shortly, I'll be starting to go to the NEC, to go to the industrial shows that are hosted there, because those are very much my areas for prospecting. Because as you know, during COVID, that pretty much shut down altogether.
No shows. Exactly.
Yeah, no shows. You can't meet people. And how do you get a hold of people when they're all working from home? You know, it's easier said than done.
So it's been a very tough time for you then, really, Adrian.
Yeah, it has been tough. It has been tough. And, you know, it's less than a year right now since the country started to reopen last year. Was it sort of March, April?
Probably was, yeah.
Something about March, April. And the toughness, if that's the right way of putting it, I'm certainly still feeling it. Things have not got back to how they were 3 or 4 years ago.
What would you say your biggest learning has been in the 28 years of being a business owner?
I think you can get forgotten very, very quickly. I think you certainly have to keep your presence up. Though the one thing that I will say is that certain clients that I've worked with, where you really buy into one another, you understand one another, they realize that I'm good at what I do and what I produce for them works for them. That's very positive. It would be a case of, well, why would we ever go and look anywhere else? Adrian's our photographer. And sometimes, there's a lap of 4 or 5 years between one shoot and then when they want me again. And it's nice to know that, because I've had that relationship and the value of what I've done for them as well, is that Adrian's the one that we're going to use. It's not a case of whoever brings the lowest price in. So when I first started for myself, I'd never worked for myself before. I'd always been employed. So actually trying to become a businessman is something I've learned along the way, which it's full of challenges, that is. And in the early days, many people would try and knock me down on price, or want a discount, or want something else. That doesn't really happen now.
No.
I think being older is helpful, more confident, and really knowing my subject. It's a case of, well, if that's the price, that's the price.
How did you handle that in your younger days when you were challenging prices?
I think I struggled in many cases. I think I had to look at it and think, well, is there something I can knock off here? Sometimes there were colleagues, like a graphic designer that I would go to who I worked with already, and say, well, look, this is what I've been asked. What do you suggest? I mean, in one case, it really worked in my favor, because the graphic designer I mentioned, he also worked for this particular company, and I think I gave him 10% off. And the MD actually worked with me on this particular job at Runcorn. When we went to have lunch, he said to me, you've taken so much care throughout all of this job. I'm going to give you your 10% back. That's the only time that's ever happened over the years. And he did give me my 10% back. And I still work for them to this day. In fact, last year I did a whole week for them. And that's probably 15, 16 years since I first did that early job with them. So they really bought into me on that occasion. I mean, okay, I produced that they needed the high quality of the work, but it was also probably the qualities of me that counted.
And that's the super learning for me, because what you were selling is your skills. It's not about price.
Yes.
It's that service that you gave them.
Yeah.
And that's why you're still there.
Yeah. And that service was really recognized as well. And it came from the top guy. So I mean, if you want, using that in terms of a reference, you couldn't ask for better, particularly when you're still going there 15 years later.
Great lesson. Looking in the next 5 years, then, what are your aspirations to the business?
Well, I'd like to get a big slice of this cake of the new energy that's coming up. As I mentioned before, hydrogen is big on the doorstep here. I've already done quite a lot of work in waste companies, and there are what are known these days as alternative fuels being produced from wastes, various segregations, creating fuels which are effectively substitutes for coal. I've already done some of that work. I did a couple of projects last year for a Dutch company who've got sites in this country, and it's at the relatively early days at the moment. But I'm hoping that that's going to significantly increase as well, because that's one of these topics that is, well, it's highly topical. And I think you've got to try and look for work in areas that are topical. There's no good trying to follow something that's it's becoming old hat very quickly, because there's not going to be a future in it. But certainly energy, every man and his dog wants it right now. And in terms of the wearing the green hat as well, you can handle it with the green hat on. Lots of these processes can be licensed and replicated abroad, So, I mean, if I can do their photography here, and they will end up winning contracts abroad with the help of that photography, you know, whether it might be supplied with a tender, anything of that nature, that's going to be a help. So people, I think, should invest in this, you know, from an image point of view.
Okay, very good. I suppose a slightly linked question to that with new innovation, new ideas coming in is about employment in the Cheshire, Wirral area. Well, what would your comments be about employment situation?
Well, I don't employ anybody myself, though when I go on assignments these days, I do have an extra pair of hands, you know, for bag carrying, running cables, putting lighting up, this kind of thing. But he's not a permanent employee. But I think I actually live in an area where the employment is actually quite high. I mean, Deeside Industrial Park continues to expand. There's quite a lot of new business in Ellesmere Port. Certainly down towards the Stanlow refinery, they're going to build an aircraft fuel from household waste rubbish plant. Next door to that is the Peel Innovation Park, which is also going to be full of various innovative energies. So it seems to be dispersing that there's continued growth there. I don't think there's high unemployment. Well, no, I'm sure there isn't high unemployment around here. And I suppose if places are expanding as they appear to be, there should be opportunities for me. Getting in is the difficult bit.
As you say, I mean, this area it's quite exciting from an innovation perspective. The market you're now trying to enter into as well is it's probably quite exciting, isn't it? It's quite exciting.
Well, and certainly energy is an exciting business. I mean, I've been around a demonstration plant recently, and I've been around one of the sites on the Peel Innovation Park. I've not seen plants like that before, and they're starting to be replicated by other companies around the country. That's a growing business, and as it's a growing business, as I keep saying, I want a slice of the cake because they're all different. None of them are carbon copies of one another. And I think if you've got technology there that you can promote and have it licensed for other countries, because this waste business is a worldwide problem. So people have got to keep forging ahead with trying to find new solutions to tackle that. And I think imagery is a great way of investing, to try and spread that and get people's attention.
Super, thank you. And what would you say, looking back now, what would you say your main advice would be to your 18-year-old self when you were in that dark room at school?
Probably to try and have more confidence. I know confidence often comes with age. So, I mean, a lot of youngsters can be very cocky and confident, but I think when you're a bit older, hopefully you would be more confident, but you can know your subject and know your stuff by then. And I certainly know my stuff really rather well, and I know industry well. And I hope people like yourself who I talk to recognise that this guy knows his industry. And I think having that knowledge background of industry puts you in a far more capable position of planning and winning and organising a job, because they're all different. Different factories have different processes, different hazards, different permits, all this kind of thing. And you only learn these as time goes on. But you can't know everything at the age of 18.
No. So principally it'd be try and be more confident. That would be give yourself more confidence.
I would say so. I mean, I wasn't particularly confident when I went to Saudi Arabia, and I was only 24 then. But the thing is, I was given such a high level of responsibility, particularly working, offshore and in refineries and these types of areas. And that was really where I I learned the safety practices. You know, the first thing you do is you go to the control room, you sign the daily log so that they know you're there. Then you find the guy who you're doing the job with. He's the one who's going to go through the induction process with you and organise your work permit. I don't think I'd ever done that in this country before I left, but it's something that I do on a regular basis now. So those early years were a very moulding educational area for me, which have stood me very well, actually.
Because for those years, it was that experience of not just the environment you were working, it's the culture as well, wasn't it? Which for a man was,
yeah, very much so. I mean, the country is just full of so many different nationalities, and you go offshore, you know, and you'll get 5 or 6 different nationalities on a platform, and everybody's got to be able to understand and communicate one another, and get their part of the job done safely.
And it's interesting what you say about I think every week that goes by, you will talk about Saudi Arabia. Is there any specific theme to that, or is it just various examples and stories through?
I think it had just such a big influence on me at an early age, because I went at the age of 24. You know, I was still living at home with my mum. Not lived away. Well, lived away at college. But never lived away to work. And I think it was such a big change, you know, going 3,500 miles away, that you either got on with it and succeeded, or you'd flounder and you'd just go home. And the fact that I was going to a land that I didn't know anything about, I just took it as it came. And you could just take it slowly, because you obviously didn't know the geography or the culture or the people, or even how the day was punctuated by prayer time. You know, they closed the country down 5 times a day for prayers. You had to get used to all that kind of thing. If I'd gone at the age of 45 or 50, I don't know, I might not have been able to tackle it. But certainly at the age of 24, you just did it.
Yeah, it's fascinating talking. See how much influence that has had on your life. It's
yeah, absolutely.
Really,
I do remember it fondly, to be honest. I mean, obviously we've all gone through hard times. I mean, I had the Gulf War when I was there as well. That wasn't much fun at all. But you know, you live to tell the tale. But there were lots of good times, and certainly the fact that I've got this Aramco background connection has certainly helped me open doors over the years. And I suppose at that early age, I would never have realised that. You know, I mean, the remarkable thing was, I mean, I was 18 when I left school. Who would have thought that 6 years later I was going to be in the Middle East? You know, I couldn't have possibly predicted that. You know, particularly when my first job was photographing furniture. So yeah, I've come a long way in that respect.
Adrian, thank you. I could talk all day, to be honest.
It's rather good, isn't it?
It's brilliant. Thank you so much for your insights of business today. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you.
Good. I've enjoyed that.